Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans and you're watching the Cedars channel from the bunker, and in this video we simply must talk about morality, specifically your morality, yes, you the viewer, and how your morality compares to Jehovah's morality. Now when I say Jehovah, I'm being very specific in singling out the God of Jehovah's Witnesses. A lot of what I'm talking about in this video will be applicable more broadly to Christianity, to theism, but there are going to be some things in this video where I'm going to be speaking exclusively about the God that Jehovah's Witnesses believe in and the theology they attach to that God and that God's behaviour. But to help guide us through this discussion and try to keep it as brief as possible, I have put together this list, which asks a series of questions that I want each of you to personally ask of yourselves, especially if you happen to be watching this video either as a believing Jehovah's Witness or perhaps as someone who is no longer involved with Jehovah's Witnesses, but still believes that the teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses are admirable, or who perhaps hates themselves for not living up to the standards that are expected of Jehovah's Witnesses. Let's take a look at this list. Let's look at the first question there. Would you kill children or babies to settle a score? Now again, for the purpose of brevity, I'm not going to go into all the Bible verses. Suffice to say, there are a number of Bible verses that you might want to check, all of which advocate for the execution of children or babies or endorse violence towards children or babies. And just as one example, again, I'm not going to go through all of these verses, but one example that always chills me is the account in 2 Samuel 12, 13 to 18, where it talks about the aftermath of the David and Bathsheba incident. One of the penalties levied against King David by God for basically committing adultery with Bathsheba and arranging for her husband to be killed, one of the punishments against David was that the baby who came about as a result of the adultery needed to die. And that's what happened. The baby died. And this was attributed to the fact that, well, this is what God wants. God wants the baby to die because of what David and Bathsheba have done. Hopefully, those of you watching this will agree that there are no situations that call for children or babies to be killed. If you are of that mindset, then I'm sorry, you're a psychopath. But that's what God calls for, not just in this instance, but again, repeatedly in Bible verse after Bible verse, it mentions or calls for violence against children or babies. And as far as I'm concerned, there's never an excuse for that, which automatically, you could say, makes my morals better than the morals of Jehovah. Let's move on to the next point. Would you have people killed for being gay? There's a verse in Leviticus 20, verse 13, which says, "If a man lies down with a male, the same as one lies down with a woman, both of them have done a detestable thing. They should be put to death without fail. Their own blood is upon them." If you look at gay people, and I'm not talking about gay people who are in the closet or who are living in denial, but gay people who are having a relationship, who are not afraid to show their love for each other, whose relationship is very much physical. If you look at such a couple and think they deserve to die, congratulations, You have the same morality as Jehovah. If, on the other hand, you're like me, and hopefully the majority of those of you watching this, you will agree that calling for the execution of people for being gay is a deeply, deeply immoral thing. Moving swiftly on to the next question. Would you execute someone for collecting wood on the wrong day? If that's totally your thing, you are going to enjoy reading Numbers 15 verses 32 to 36, which describes a man collecting pieces of wood on the Sabbath day. He's brought to Moses and Aaron and the whole assembly, and Jehovah says to Moses, the man should be put to death without fail, and the whole assembly should stone him outside of the camp. A man is executed, is killed, just for breaking the Sabbath. This is one of many examples in the Bible, where the punishment far outweighs the crime, to the point where you could argue the punishment is itself a crime, whereas the original sin isn't a crime. It's not a crime to gather wood on a certain day of the week. It is a crime to slaughter someone. Moving on to the next question on the list. Would you kill those who disobey their parents? Now, I am a parent. Parenting can be quite frustrating at times, and it can be deeply frustrating when your children are disobedient. Perhaps they're having a bad day, perhaps they're ignoring you, you could be saying something to them, and literally as you're telling them not to do something, they go ahead and do the very thing you're telling them not to do. I get it. It's frustrating. But on my very worst, most maniacal days, I have never thought, well, the solution here is for my child to die. And yet that's what's called for in multiple Bible verses. A disobedient child needs to be brought before the elders, and if it's agreed that this child has been disobedient, execution, death. Again, the punishment far outweighs the crime. It's conceivable that you, the viewer watching this, will be nodding along thinking, well, that's perfectly reasonable. But again, I would respectfully submit you're a psychopath. Moving on to our next question. Would you penalize women who give birth to girls instead of boys? Oh no, the woman's not had a boy, she's had a girl. What a catastrophe. What this situation calls for is a penalty. In fact, all births require a penalty. If a woman gives birth full stop, then she has committed some kind of sin, or she is in some way ritually unclean. But if the woman gives birth to a girl rather than a boy, she is double unclean. She is twice as unclean as if she had given birth to a boy. If you're listening to this thinking Lloyd is speaking total gibberish, look up Leviticus 12 verses 1 to 5. It's all laid out for you. Now, apart from anything else, this for me spells out very clearly God's view of women in general. If you're going to punish women who give birth to girls by insisting that they are doubly unclean from if they'd given birth to boys, what you're suggesting is that girls or women or females are inferior, are fundamentally undesirable. This is the morality of God. Again, read the verse for yourself if you think I'm making this up. If you're nodding along thinking, well, again, this sounds perfectly reasonable, congratulations, you and Jehovah have the same morals. If, like the rest of us, you think this is seriously messed up, then I'm sorry, but that's nothing to be ashamed of. But we must press on to the next question on our list. Would you punish people for the sins of their grandparents. Yes, this is what God's morality calls for. This is what Jehovah's morality calls for. It is advisable in certain situations, apparently, for someone to be punished for what their grandparents have done. And if you don't believe me, the verse to read is Exodus 20 verses 4 to 6, which says in part, "For I, Jehovah your God, am a God who requires exclusive devotion, bringing punishment for the error of fathers upon sons, upon the third generation, and upon the fourth generation of those who hate me." So not just grandparents, great-grandparents. I'm very relieved to say that that is not how the justice system works. You cannot be jailed for something that your great-grandparent has done, because that would be insane. But that's the morality of Jehovah. We're staying in Exodus 20 for our next question. Would you omit child molestation from a list of the worst possible sins? Let's say, for the sake of argument, you're writing down a basic guide to morality for mankind. Let's say it's 10 things that you really don't want people to do. 10 of the worst crimes imaginable. It's difficult to imagine any sane moral person not including in that list don't molest children. Sexually abusing children is an abomination that can cause unfathomable emotional and psychological damage. Don't do it. If, like me, you would include that in your 10 commandments, I'm sorry, Jehovah has other ideas. If you turn to, again, Exodus 20, you find the 10 commandments in the first 17 verses. Now just think for a moment, 10 commandments, 10 opportunities to, again, convey the very worst things someone could conceivably do as a human being and say, don't do these things. And the first 4 of them are all used up on God basically talking about himself. So the first one is, you must not have any other gods but me. The second commandment is, whatever you do, don't make an image or an idol, especially of any other gods but me. The third one is, whatever you do, don't use my name in a way I disapprove of. And the fourth one is, have a special day of the week that's dedicated to remembering me. And keep it so special that you should totally kill anyone who collects wood on that day. Seriously, we're 4 commandments into the 10 commandments. And all of them so far are about God and how great God is and how important it is to worship God and only God and in the way God prescribes. You've already wasted nearly half of these 10 commandments purely on your own narcissism. Is it any surprise that something as fundamental as don't go abusing children doesn't make it onto the list? In fact, nowhere in the Bible is there a verse that says it's wrong to have sex with children. You can find verses against incest, but clearly incest is not the same thing necessarily as child sex abuse, because, for example, a brother and a sister could get into a relationship when they're adults, or a mother could conceivably marry her son, again, when they're both adults. That doesn't single out the specific abomination of sex with children. If you're considering the Bible to be God's message to mankind, a message of morality, a message that says, this is what I want from you, you have to ask the question, how is it that in all of these pages, in all of these books, written across centuries apparently, no one has thought to write down, don't have sex with children? On to our 8th question. Would you tolerate slavery and offer advice on slave ownership? Again, for reasons of brevity, I am not going to go through all of the verses in the Bible that do exactly this, that tolerate slavery, that waste opportunities to denounce slavery, that even go so far as to offer advice on how slave owners should treat their slaves. The verses are here in the caption. There's a lot of them. It would seem as though Jehovah is okay with slavery. Personally, I'm not, and I would hope that, again, the vast majority of you watching this find the concept of one human owning another human to be completely grotesque. I've got news for you. Your morals and the morals of Jehovah are not the same, and that's a good thing. Question number 10. Would you expect parents to kill their children to prove their loyalty to you? I am, of course, referring to the account of Abraham's aborted sacrifice of Isaac, as recorded in Genesis 22, verses 1 to 19. As a Jehovah's Witness, and I would assume the same is true of most fundamentalist Christians, in fact, most Christians full stop, you are brought up to view this story in a positive light. But how can anyone seriously admire a God who does this, who requires this specific test so that someone can prove their loyalty? I want you to prove your loyalty to me, and the test I've chosen is, I want to see how close you'll come to killing your child for me. Now, you'll remember at the beginning I mentioned that this is specifically about Jehovah rather than the Christian God more generally. And that certainly applies to the final question on my list, which is specifically about Jehovah's Witness beliefs. Would you slaughter everyone on earth who doesn't worship you? That is Jehovah's plan for ridding the earth of wickedness and injustice. It's to kill not just everybody who doesn't believe in God, or not just everybody who doesn't identify as a Christian, but specifically everyone who isn't one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And we're talking, I checked today, the world's population is estimated to be 7.8 billion. So God's master plan for ridding the earth of wickedness is to commit global genocide on 7.8 billion men, women, and children. Now, it's conceivable, if you are one of Jehovah's Witnesses, that at this point you're saying, typical lying apostate. That's not what we believe at all. Everyone knows that when Armageddon comes, God is going to decide for himself on the basis of people's heart condition whether they survive through to the paradise or not. It's not as simple as saying that you need to be baptized as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Well, if that describes you, I would only point you to the October 2019 Watchtower magazine, specifically page 11, paragraph 14, which says, we need to help people understand how important it is for them to take their stand for Jehovah and his kingdom. This means trying to motivate people to make the truth their own by applying what they learn, dedicating their life to Jehovah, and getting baptized. Only then will they survive Jehovah's day. I can't think of a clearer way of expressing. And let's be honest, Jehovah's Witnesses know deep down that that's the teaching. They make excuses on this, probably more than anything, to calm their own cognitive dissonance. But ultimately, they know that this is the case. They know that the teaching is, when Armageddon comes, if you're not one of Jehovah's Witnesses, And if you're not a faithful Jehovah's Witness when Armageddon comes, so it's even less than the 8.5 million Jehovah's Witnesses that we're talking about when we're talking about those who survive Armageddon, only a really limited number are going to survive what is, again, a global genocide. God wants to rid the earth of billions of men, women, and children for the sole crime of not being Jehovah's Witnesses. He wants a planet that is populated only with people who recognize not just his authority, but the authority of the 8 dudes in New York who he has appointed as his channel. You can, if you want, consider this to be a moral thing. You can, if you want, think, well, that's perfectly reasonable. If I were God, I'd want to kill everyone on the planet that wouldn't worship me too. But for the rest of us who aren't psychopaths or sociopaths, that's not going to fly, I'm afraid. That is a deeply immoral thing. And I'm glad that unquestionably, that's why I've been so confident with the title of this video, unquestionably, the vast majority of you watching this video will find at least some of these questions in this list, areas in which their morality deviates significantly from the morality of Jehovah. But that's all I have for you in this particular video. I hope it's been food for thought for some of you. Don't forget to subscribe to the John Cedars channel for more such videos, and as always, thank you for watching.